Previously, Rena's peaceful life took an unexpected turn after she repeatedly crossed paths with the mysterious Rainier. What started as a series of strange coincidences soon became something much bigger than either of them expected. And now, the story is about to take its first major turn. A moment later, he quietly continued on his way. Soon, Rainier entered a restaurant. The place wasn't very busy, with only a few customers inside. As soon as he sat down, the owner approached him. "Shall I bring your majesty?" Then he added, "What brings you here at this hour? Is this about Duke Camelot? I still haven't finished organizing the files." Rainier calmly looked at him. "Kyle, do you believe in coincidences?" Kyle looked curious. "What do you mean?" Rainier explained. "For example, if I happened to run into the same woman every time I left the Imperial Palace, and it happened several times in a single day, could that truly be a coincidence?" Kyle immediately became serious. "Do you suspect she's an assassin or a spy?" Rainier thought for a moment. "Honestly, I don't know. She certainly doesn't seem like one." He remembered the moment she had rushed toward him. She had clearly shown no intention of attacking him. Her hands had obviously never held a sword. Instead, she had approached him without the slightest bit of caution, looking at him with innocent curiosity. Rather than an assassin or a spy, she reminded him of a small puppy that had been lovingly raised by a noble family. After a brief silence, Rainier said, "I need to find out whether these meetings are the will of heaven or the will of man." Kyle nodded. "I understand. I'll investigate." With that, Kyle excused himself to greet the other customers. Left alone, Rainier looked around the cafe. "It's strange," he thought. "This place is always full of customers, even though the coffee tastes terrible." The truth, however, was simple. Most of the customers came because Kyle himself was so handsome. Meanwhile, Rainier sat quietly in the corner. The only person on his mind was Rena. Who exactly is that woman? Meanwhile, Rena was as busy as ever. The workload at the Ministry of Finance never seemed to end. No matter how many documents everyone finished, another pile immediately appeared. At this rate, Rena felt like she was going to work herself to death all over again. Something felt different today, though. Sanjay was unusually quiet. Normally, he would have turned the entire office upside down by now. Instead, he looked as though he were being haunted by something. Suddenly, a group of soldiers marched into the ministry. "Everyone, stay where you are. Move against the walls immediately." The office instantly fell silent. The soldiers announced that they had come to arrest everyone involved in Duke Camelot's bribery scheme and the creation of illegal slush funds. Rena was shocked. None of the employees fully understood what was happening. However, everyone knew one thing. If crimes like these had been committed, Sanjay had to be involved. And this was no minor offense. The employees immediately begin whispering among themselves. "The inspection team is involved? This can't be an ordinary investigation. Why isn't Sanjay saying anything? Why is he just standing there?" The lead inspector steps forward and looks directly at Sanjay. "Are you the head of the Treasury Department?" Sanjay nervously nods. The inspector begins reading the official charges. "According to the inspection team's internal investigation, ever since you were appointed head of the Treasury Department, the financial offices of the Western region, including the Duchy of Camelot, deliberately manipulated official records to create illegal slush funds. We have also uncovered multiple cases in which bribes were accepted using money embezzled through manipulated tax revenues." Sanjay immediately panics. "That can't be true. There must be some kind of mistake." The inspector remains calm. "We'll determine the truth during the investigation." Because of this, both the department head and the officer responsible for the Western region's report will be taken into custody. Rena freezes. Something doesn't make sense. Just yesterday, Connie had completed the report for the Western region. Originally, someone else had been responsible for that report, but the work had been dumped on Connie instead. Rena had even helped her finish it. One of the officers turns toward Connie. "Were you the one who prepared this report?" Connie quietly answers, "Yes." The soldiers immediately arrest her. Everyone connected to the case is taken into custody. The employees around Rena begin whispering once again. Did Connie really commit such a serious crime? Rena knows the answer. There is no way Connie would ever do something like that. She wants to speak up. She wants to defend her friend. But she knows that raising her voice now would accomplish nothing. it would only get her arrested as well. At that moment, Rina finally understands everything. It wasn't a coincidence that the person originally responsible for the Western Territory handed the work over to Connie. It had all been planned from the beginning. Sanjay had deliberately set her up to become the scapegoat. Rina clenches her fists. She refuses to let him get away with it. Numbers never lie. The evidence still exists. And she is determined to expose Sanjay's crimes and clear Connie's name. Later that night, the cafe had finally closed. Kyle quietly cleaned the tables before preparing to leave. Finishing work always felt satisfying. Still, something puzzled him. Not a single customer had finished their coffee that day. In fact, almost every customer left most of it behind. Business was steadily improving, yet no one ever seemed to enjoy the coffee. Kyle couldn't understand why. He used only the highest quality coffee beans and an expensive espresso machine. No matter how much he thought about it, he couldn't figure out what the problem was. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Kyle walked over and called out, "I'm sorry, but we're closing for the day." When he opened the door, he found Rina standing outside. She looked slightly nervous, clutching an envelope in her hands. Of all the places she wanted to visit, this cafe had been at the very bottom of the list. She had promised herself that she would never get involved in the events of the original story. But now she had no other choice. To everyone else, this looked like an ordinary cafe. In reality, it was the headquarters of the Emperor's Secret Information Guild. Kyle, the cafe owner, was actually the leader of the guild and one of the Emperor's closest confidants. That was exactly why Rina had come. She needed to gather as much information as possible to save Connie. As long as she avoided revealing how she knew certain things, she could still protect her friend. Even if she submitted a report through normal channels, there was a chance the evidence would be buried or covered up. The only way to save Connie was to deliver the information directly to the Emperor. Taking a deep breath, Rina gathered her courage and stepped inside. Kyle greeted her politely. "What brings you here?" Rina couldn't help noticing that the novel's description had been completely accurate. Kyle really was just as handsome as everyone said. Still, she couldn't help thinking, isn't it strange for a cafe owner to ask a customer why they came instead of asking what they'd like to order? Trying to act naturally, Rina smiled. "I'd like a cup of coffee. Is it still all right to order?" Kyle stared at her for a moment before replying in a cold voice. "Are you serious? I asked because it looked like you came here for a completely different reason." Rina's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Did he figure everything out the moment I walked in? Is this what makes the leader of the Imperial Intelligence Guild so different from everyone else? To Rina's surprise, Kyle suddenly smiled brightly. "Or perhaps," he said enthusiastically, "you came because you wanted me to buy something from you? Maybe you've come to tell me about some promising new investment opportunity? I mean, you didn't actually come here just for coffee, did you?" Rina stood there, completely stunned. Kyle cheerfully guided her to a table. "We don't usually get customers at this time of day," he said with a smile. "Especially people who simply come to enjoy a cup of coffee. I'll bring the menu right away." Rina quietly let out a sigh of relief. At least she hadn't been exposed the moment she walked through the door. She certainly hadn't expected Kyle to have this kind of personality. Maybe the original novel hadn't described him perfectly after all. A few moments later, Kyle served her a cup of coffee. "Please enjoy." Rina noticed him staring at her with an unusually intense gaze. She couldn't understand why he was watching her so closely. What a strange person, she thought. Finally, she took her first sip. The moment the coffee touched her tongue, she nearly choked. What in the world is this? Why does it taste like this? Is this actually coffee? Or poison? For a split second, she seriously considered spitting it out. Seeing the expression on her face, Kyle calmly spoke. "It seems the flavor doesn't suit your taste. I've worked hard on this blend, which is unfortunate, but there's no need to force yourself to drink it. You can simply leave it like everyone else." Rina suddenly misunderstood everything. "So this is the test. He deliberately served me terrible coffee to measure my patience and determination. And when he mentioned the other customers, he meant they all failed. That means this is my final test." Of course, every single one of those conclusions existed only inside Rina's imagination. Completely unaware of her misunderstanding, Kyle simply waited. Rina suddenly smiled. "Please wait. I'm going to finish every last drop. For Connie's sake, I have to pass this test. Treating the coffee like medicine, she picked up the cup and drank the entire thing in one gulp. Not a single drop remained. Kyle stared at the empty cup in complete disbelief. His eyes filled with tears. This is incredible. You are the first customer in the entire history of this cafe to finish a whole cup without leaving a single drop. As the owner, I'm honestly deeply moved. Rina became even more confused. She still wasn't sure whether the test had ended. Thinking he had spoken some kind of secret code, she decided to respond with one of her own. Like a blue hawk soaring across the vast open sky, it has guided me straight to this very place. Kyle blinked in confusion. Meanwhile, Rina desperately prayed that she could somehow get through this conversation without making another mistake. After a brief silence, Kyle finally asked, "So, what kind of business brings you here today? Are you here to buy information? Or are you here to sell it?" Rina quietly handed him the envelope. Kyle carefully opened it and began reading. Inside was a complete collection of financial records concerning Duke Camelot and every noble family under his influence. The documents contained enough evidence to support every accusation against them. After reading everything, Kyle looked back at Rina. "I'll be honest. It will be difficult to offer you a high price for this information." Rina looked puzzled. "Why?" Kyle calmly explained. "The value of information depends entirely on how rare and exclusive it is. Everything you've brought me has been carefully organized using public records and documents from the Ministry of Finance. If the Inspection Bureau continues its investigation, all of this will eventually become public knowledge anyway. If anyone could uncover the same information with enough time and effort, then it's difficult to justify paying a large amount for it." Rina smiled confidently. "I think you're only looking at one side of the situation. Rarity is certainly important. But isn't timing just as valuable? If the right information reaches the right person at exactly the right moment, and they can act on it immediately, then that information becomes priceless. Of course, if you aren't interested in acting quickly or winning the race against time, then there's nothing more for us to discuss." Kyle smiled. "I was already interested the moment you walked through that door. You knew exactly who we are and what this guild really is. You are definitely not an ordinary woman. I have to admit, you've won this round. You have a remarkable talent for negotiation." Rina smiled with relief. At last they had reached an agreement. Kyle folded the documents. "Now then, what are your conditions?" Before accepting the deal, however, he asked one final question. "How were you so certain that now was the perfect time to bring me this information?" Rina answered without hesitation. "I heard that His Majesty has already decided to bring down Duke Camelot. If he intends to eliminate every corrupt noble who abused their position during the war, then he has to act before they have time to destroy the remaining evidence. The best way to do that is through a sudden investigation without warning. And to launch that investigation, he needs solid evidence. That's why I believed these documents would be most valuable right now." Kyle was genuinely impressed. Then he asked, "And where exactly did you obtain this information?" A moment later, his expression turned serious. "Was it Count Rankles? Or perhaps Miss Rina Diaz?" Rina froze. How did he know her name? She had never introduced herself. And why had he suddenly mentioned Count Rankles? Kyle continued in a calm but cold voice. "If Count Rankles had sent you, he would also have told you where to find us, the secret password, and the true identity of this guild. So if that isn't the case, how did you discover that this guild serves His Majesty directly?" Rina's mind raced. She knew the answer because she had read the original novel. But there was no way she could tell him that. Instead, she answered confidently. "The guild's contact phrase mentions the Blue Hawk. Everyone knows the Blue Hawk was His Majesty's symbol back when he was still the Grand Duke. According to the Empire's history, the descendants of the goddess had inherited the right to use the goddess's crest. However, the previous emperor, who had stolen the throne from the rightful heir, forbade the young Grand Duke from using that sacred symbol. As a result, the Blue Hawk became his personal emblem instead. It was meant as an insult, branding the rightful heir as nothing more than a collateral branch of the imperial family. But after reclaiming the throne through a bloody purge, the Blue Hawk became a symbol recognized throughout the empire." Kyle stared at her in surprise. She had uncovered the guild's true identity from a single historical detail. Rina continued, "Besides, Who else would dare use the blue hawk as their symbol? There isn't a blue hawk bookstore or a blue hawk herb shop anywhere on the continent. Even when people name their horses, they avoid using blue hawk. Instead, they choose names like Skyhawk or Aquahawk. The emperor has never forbidden people from using it. But everyone is still careful. Cal burst into laughter. So it isn't just me. It seems everyone walks on eggshells around His Majesty. Then he looked at Rina. I'm convinced. Tell me your conditions. Rina finally reached the point she had been waiting for. I'll be direct. My best friend was arrested because of this case. Her name is Connie. She works in the Treasury Department. I want to save her. Kyle sighed. Plea bargains aren't under my authority. Rina refused to back down. You've already seen the documents. You know the real criminals are Sanjay and Andrew. They were released after questioning and are comfortably living under house arrest. Meanwhile, my friend is locked inside a detention center, still being interrogated. We're not even allowed to bring her a blanket or a change of clothes. Isn't that obviously unfair? Connie is innocent. If you can't arrange her release, then at least introduce me to someone who can prove her innocence. Kyle quietly studied her. You have absolute faith in your friend. Rina nodded without hesitation. We've been best friends since our academy days. The moment Kyle heard the word academy, something in his expression changed. After a brief silence, he smiled. Thank you for answering all of my questions. Because of my position, I have to be cautious. But now, we have a deal. Come back here at the same time next week. Until then, I personally guarantee Miss Connie's safety. Rina's face lit up with relief. Just as she was about to leave, Kyle suddenly smiled again. Before you go, would you like another cup of coffee? The excitement in his voice immediately terrified Rina. She hurried toward the door. I think I'll be leaving now. To her, those words sounded far scarier than any threat. She silently swore that she would never drink Kyle's coffee again. At that very moment, another man stepped out from the room in the back. It was none other than Rainier. Looking toward Kyle, he calmly asked, So, do you think today's meeting was really just another coincidence? Kyle admits it's hard to explain, but it's definitely strange. Rainier says he never imagined she would come here, offer to make a deal, and even bring exactly the information they needed most right now. He asks Kyle if he had investigated her properly. Kyle replies that he did everything he could. Rainier then goes through all the documents on Rina. Her mother was the second daughter of a count, while her father was a commoner and an orphanage graduate. Her father was later appointed as a full professor at the academy and received the title of baron, though it exists in name only. In truth, he's closer to being a commoner than a true noble. Miss Rina has also been working at the Imperial Palace continuously since graduating from the academy, and there are no suspicious gaps in her history. Rainier wonders what the chances are that Rina could be one of Camelot's pawns. Kyle insists that's absolutely impossible. Count Rankle's family and the Duke have been famous rivals for years. Since Rina is Count Rankle's niece, there's no way she wouldn't know that her family's ties were supposedly severed because of a marriage between different social classes. But that was only a nominal excuse, and the current Count is actually on fairly good terms with the family in question. Kyle adds that since the Count has no heir, there's a high chance Miss Rina will inherit the title in the future. Given that, she has no reason to switch sides and join the Duke of Camelot. Even Rainier admits that if this were a setup, there are a couple of sloppy details, along with a few coincidences that wouldn't have been difficult to orchestrate intentionally. That earlier incident was probably just simple kindness, since no one could have possibly known that his late younger sister's favorite flower was Frisia. Still, he can't dismiss everything as mere coincidence. He tells Kyle that he will attend the meeting 1 week from now in person. Kyle is confused about why he insists on this, but Rainier is determined to see everything with his own eyes and question her personally. 1 week later, after work, Rina is about to leave her office when she overhears some colleagues talking. Since Donovan isn't around to nag them anymore, they finally feel like they can breathe. They've actually been leaving work on time every day now, joking that they hope their manager never comes back. They also talk badly about Connie. They say they feel sorry for whoever's friend became a criminal, and wonder what Connie was even thinking when she helped her manager commit a crime. At such a young age, she's likely to end up in prison for a long time. Rina overhears this and chooses to ignore it. She's determined that with the information she's gathering, she will clear Connie's name once and for all, starting with today's meeting. She arrives at the cafe, and as she opens the door, Kyle greets her. She's surprised to see there are still customers inside, wondering why anyone would come here just for coffee. Kyle leads her into another room and tells her to wait, since the conversation might take a while. He then tells her to head down to the basement. It all feels suspicious to Rina, but she reminds herself she's doing this for Connie's sake. She just hopes there isn't a kidnapper waiting for her down there. When she reaches the basement, she finds someone sitting there, and the coat he's wearing looks familiar. It's none other than Rainier. He greets her with a simple hello. Rina is too worn out to even feel surprised anymore. She recalls wondering why he always looked disgusted whenever they ran into each other, and now she understands he was connected to Information Guild all along. Without a second thought, she asks him straight out if Connie is doing okay. Rainier says that's an unexpected question. Rina doesn't understand what's so unexpected about it. He explains that he assumed the first thing she would ask was why he was here, implying she already knew his identity and had been deliberately following him. He asks if he was wrong. Rina is frustrated by this. She thinks he's the one who's been following her and showing up wherever she goes. She figures he might just be a little confused, though she admits he's handsome enough that someone could easily make that kind of mistake. Rainier suddenly stands up and asks if she's feeling hot. Rina is flustered by the question, all because of him. In her head, she tells herself to get it together and not fall for a handsome guy like this. This has to be some kind of trick to gain the upper hand in the negotiation. She promises herself she won't fall for it that easily. Suddenly, the door opens and Kyle walks in, telling them the last customers have left, so they've closed the cafe early. There's no need to worry about their conversation leaking out. Kyle walks over and stands behind Rainier, who then says, "Shall we talk business?" And with that, the negotiation begins. But this is where everything changes. The negotiation has finally begun, and the deal Rina is about to propose could decide Connie's future once and for all. But will Rainier trust her, or uncover something that changes everything? We'll find out in the next part, so don't forget to subscribe if you don't want to miss it.